Comic book creator Mark Millar has an idea to save the comic book industry, something that he says is in the worst state it's ever been. Let's get into this here on what his idea is to save the industry, and also his comments noting that the industry is in the worst state it's ever been. He made an appearance on the Thinking Critical channel where he confirmed that he is going to be returning to DC to write a Superman story. He then quickly segued into positing his idea that at least 20 comic book legends should return to both DC and Marvel to do at minimum 2-year runs in order to save the comic book industry. This is what he said here. He said, there's something weird going on right now where I really feel like guys like me and guys who've worked in the industry for a while and been very lucky, had a lot of big books and everything, we've got to man the stations. I think everybody's got to come in and do a couple of projects and find an artist who's as good as you can possibly get and just do some killer run on something. He said, he then explained why he thinks that these people need to return. He says, the retailers, they're struggling out there. They're dying. All my friends and retailers are saying they've never known it as hard as this. So I think that's pretty damning there. I know you'll have a lot of people out there, specifically like Tom Taylor, talking about how their books are selling. Things are doing really well. But we constantly get reminded that things aren't really doing well. We've got Mark Millar here saying that the retailers are struggling out there. They're dying, saying that it's the worst they've ever known it. We had, I feel like a couple months ago, a retailer posted on Bleeding Cool that new comic sales are in decline. People aren't reading them. They're staying on the shelves. Just no one's interested in what's going on. He specifically pointed to the most recent gimmick with Miss Marvel dying. We've seen numerous comic book shops shut down, close their doors. The sales numbers were declining when we actually got to see them from Diamond over there on Comic-Con. Now they kind of hide it, so you don't really know what the sales are doing. You even had Kelly Sue DeConnick infamously said, if you don't like my politics, don't buy my comics. She said even a couple years ago that the state of comics was not looking very good. She was saying like a lot of comics that would have been canceled are continuing because that's just how bad it's gotten. Like they've been canceled for low sales are still continuing just because they don't have any way to like really recover or increase those sales. Those sales are now like decent, even though they would have been canceled years ago for being low. Just kind of showing you where it is. But let's continue here. Millar does kind of elaborate on his idea here for bringing these comic book legends back. He says, and I was like, okay, let's get Olivier Coipel and Pepe Larraz or whatever, and we go into a Captain America and a Wolverine run or something. Everybody's got to come back and do 2 runs, and if 20 big name writers and 20 big name artists do that, you've got an amazing couple of years of comic books. We need to get something like that going again. You want to see some excitement at Marvel and DC again, I think. Interestingly enough, there was an actual proprietor there, Yul Carter. He runs Fantastic Comics in Berkeley, California. He actually suggested that if this indeed was something to be done, it should be Mark Millar or Todd McFarlane returning to write Spider-Man and doing the art on Spider-Man. He said, because that's the book it needs to be. Of course, everybody knows that, meaning Spider-Man is probably the biggest seller for retailers. It is the one that maybe rises all boats, or used to be the case. Not sure if that really is indeed. I'd have to probably pick their brains and see what they're seeing on the retail front. But Millar went on and said, in reality, in the last 10 years, he actually points out this. He says, in reality, in the last 10 years, there hasn't been any real big blow-up success in the creator-owned world. Saga was probably the last one that went crazy. Things have done, they've done nicely, but Saga was the last time there was a phenomenon. I think Walking Dead prior to that. So, there's been a few. I think this is kind of old thinking. He's still thinking about retailers, and that's where you need to sell comics. I think we have seen some big blow-up successes, even if you want to talk about at publishing companies. Berserker with Keanu Reeves obviously comes to mind for me. If you want to look at stuff that hasn't been done outside of like Image and stuff like that, you obviously have Eric July's Isom. Both the first book and the second book have grossed over $1 million in sales. I think the first one did like 4 million or something like that, and the second one is closing in on like 1.5, I believe. So huge numbers over there. And then obviously you've got Ethan Van Sciver on Cyberfrog. There's a lot of people finding success as well. Various things. I mean, I think the Boom Studios has been republishing Power Rangers stuff and making hundreds of thousands of dollars doing that. So there you are seeing some success from people that are kind of quote unquote working at the mainstream publishers as well as people that are doing it on their own. So I do think that's a little bit of a old way of thinking where he's really specifically looking at retailers as being the point of sale for comics. And then he goes on and says, but the real success comes from the industry. And I'm not talking about as individuals, as creators. It comes from the industry when Marvel and DC are doing well, particularly Marvel. And again, people hate to hear this because you're making money for the man. You're showing it up a corporation. But the honest truth is that creator-owned growth comes from Marvel and DC doing well. Again, I think this is an old way of thinking. I think this might have been the case back in maybe the 90s and stuff like that, where you had big runs, Todd McFarlane doing Spider-Man, then going on and like doing Image and stuff like that, launching the creator-owned stuff. I think you even might have saw it a little bit in the past decade with Scott Snyder trying to do his big Batman run and then launching his own creator-owned stuff. I think that works to an extent, but I also, and you've seen Ethan Van Sciver kind of do that. I think obviously really successful runs with Jeff Johns on Green Lantern. And obviously then parlaying that into launching Cyberfrog and the success he's had with that. But I think there's, and obviously you've got Graham Nolan doing his whole kind of Nolanverse stuff that he's launched. Mike Barron obviously is still doing a lot of crowdfunded stuff off of the work that he's kind of did with the Flash and that reputation he built up. Chuck Dixon, the same thing. But I do think we see people that did not work at DC or Marvel whatsoever, and they're finding success too. It might not be instant success. It's not always going to be instant success, but they're grinding away. They're building up their new things. I think Eric July is one of those people. He's never worked at there, and he has probably one of the most successful comic book companies out there with just 2 books being sold. As far as like looking at the sales, I think John De La Rose is another person you can point at. He's put out a ton of books. I think you can also look at Tim Lim and Doug Ernst. I think they have done well with what they've done over at Iconic Comics and creating the things that they're creating over there. So I do think that you can see success on that front as well, and they are not attached to Marvel or DC in any capacity. Nevertheless, Miller goes on and says that everybody needs to go back and do 1 or 2 projects, I think, and I'm going to try and get my friends to do this over the next couple of years, try and get some excitement going back at the companies. Obviously, there's some great books. There's 2 or 3 good books. Okay, so like he's again pointing out how bad the quality is over there at Miller, and I think that's something that like his whole idea is basically like these people that they have over there now, the talent, the editors, everyone, they don't know how to write good stories. They're putting out crap. That's why sales are so bad. And his whole idea is like replacing them with the people that had better sales in the past. So I think that's a really indictment on just how really bad a lot of the new comics are and the quality that they are. And people are just kind of fed up with it. And I think, as your boy Zach said, they basically just become a gay bar, and they're trying to spread that out to the rest of the industry. No one is people aren't interested in going to a gay bar. They don't want to go read books that are all about just like gay and homosexual characters. And I think that's like a big portion of that. And then obviously they've got the whole political preaching too, and a lot of the stuff. There's obviously a lot of factors. And then at the end of the day, even when they don't even have that stuff, a lot of their stories are just plain bad. They make a really bad editorial decisions. They do things a lot for shock value, and it's just uninteresting. And they also like rehashing old things. I mean, look at they rehashed Miller's Civil War story with Bendis and doing Civil War 2, and they just kind of rehash these events over and over again because they are at the end of the day out of ideas. They don't have any kind of original or new ideas for the most part. He says there needs to be 20 great books. And you can go back and look at those other periods in history. Look at the 90s, look at the 80s, look at the 60s. There were so many books that I couldn't afford to buy, all the books I wanted to buy. Nobody's in that position anymore. Everybody's like, yeah, there's only 2 things worth checking out. I think that's absolutely the case when you look at Marvel and DC. I think people have completely abandoned them. They see them for what they are. They aren't must-buys. They aren't must-reads. You don't really care what's going on with these characters because they've maligned them in so many ways. For a lot of times, they aren't even the same character. They've done some kind of replacement with them. We had the whole Marvel Now thing where they were literally creating like new Iron Mans, but it was Ironheart, right? Or you had like the new Nova. They were just like replacing the characters with their whole like diversity representation agenda, and people just weren't interested in that. They're interested in new stories about Iron Man, Batman, etc. The characters that they know and love. Millar goes on and says, I want to see people in that position again where they're holding $20 in their hands, but they need $60 for the number of good comics that come out that week. Yeah, I think that's great. I do think there is some of that when you have like multiple launches from creators that are now going independent, doing their own creator-owned stuff. Obviously, the price point is a little higher. You usually see comics running around $25, $30, and then you have to add in shipping, and so like, and there are a bunch of that. So you do have to kind of be selective with that, and I understand that. And obviously, especially in the economy you're in, belts have been tightened. Doing that myself. So that is something there, but I do think there is still really good quality stuff being made out there. I always like to tout Chuck's Hunter and Ninja Bear. I really enjoy that. I think what Graham Nolan did with the Two-Fisted Manly Tales, the anthology, so many really good stories in there, excellent stuff. So there is a lot of good independent stuff still being made out there, and that you have to like pick and choose what you want. I know a lot of people are talking about Aaron Lopresti's Wraith of God being one of the best comics that has come out in recent years. So I just kind of want to read it this year. I kind of talked about it at the beginning of the video, but you had this guy, Rod Lamberti from Rodman Comics. He detailed in a blog post at Bleeding Cool, new comic sales here in the comic store are increasingly slowing down. The recent death of Ms. Marvel and Amazing Spider-Man was not a big deal at the store. The latest issues of Iron Man and Hulk are low sellers. The characters have fans, but few are interested in their latest adventures. And that's coming from a retailer who's seeing sales dry up for new comic sales. So what Millar's saying about the industry being in a dire state, you're hearing it here from a retailer as well. You even have James Gunn, the DC Studios CEO, telling Michael Rosenbaum earlier this year, he said, I started out, I wanted to write comic books when I was younger. If I was writing comic books today, I'd probably be unhappy because so few people are reading comic books. So even James Gunn recognizes that people aren't reading comic books anymore. The sales are down. It's not looking good for the industry. Interestingly enough, Jim Lee, who runs DC Comics, he thinks that James Gunn will be one of the catalysts to kind of rejuvenate interest in comics. He told this to the Hollywood Reporter. He says, it's amazing to have partners in Peter and James, particularly James. He was a comics fan growing up and knows our mythology inside out. And having that kind of ally in the live action space allows us to really leverage what he is doing and allow us to market and sell comic books to new readers. These are people who are interested in his movies, his TV shows, and if they want to take a deep dive into these characters, he directs them to the comic books. And he has done that, but he's directing them to the gay bar comics, like the Wonder Woman rewrite from Kelly Sue DeConnick, which they specifically said was a queer rewrite of Wonder Woman's history in interviews discussing that book. And those are the things that James Gunn is promoting. He's just kind of promoting the status quo that people have run away from that. So he might get on the short end, the short run, get people in, get some initial sales. But again, people are going to find out what he's actually selling, realize it's absolute dog crap, and they're going to run away just like they had been doing before. So he might be able to like dupe a couple people into getting some sales. They'll read it and they're like, what in the world did I just read? Why did I buy this? What was the point of this? And they don't come back for a second time. They are questioning James Gunn's reputation as a connoisseur of quality, specifically when he's describing something like The Flash as the greatest comic book movie of all time. I wouldn't trust anyone who said that to recommend comic books. So, but it does kind of show you a different view on how to save the industry, but I think it does show that there is clearly an issue with the comic book industry. I don't think it's going to get any better. I don't think either of these solutions are the real solution. I do think the solution is going to be creator-owned stuff, people doing their own things, writing interesting, captivating stories that have timeless messaging, are fun action-adventure stories, and you're going to be doing that through either, and that's what's going to happen. They're going to grab people by the throat, as Mike Barron likes to say, with the stories, and word of mouth will spread, and people will flock to those stories. And I think that is how you change things, and that's how you're going to rejuvenate. It's going to be a long process, and it's going to be a lot of pain and suffering, and there's going to be a lot of tribulation, I think. But at the end of the day, I think it'll be better for the comic book industry, and I think that's what is going to have to occur. Is you're going to have to get back to just solid, good storytelling with good morals and good messaging.